Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. I want to tell you about a phone call I received this week that was one of the strangest phone calls I've ever received in my 25 years of being a rabbi. It was a message, like most of the calls that come in, and I try to return them in a timely fashion. And it was from a rabbi who will remain nameless, who works in New York City. And the rabbi said, "I'm calling to verify about this couple." "Rabbi, that's a lovely sentence. I don't know what you're saying," I replied. He says, "There's a couple, and they say they know you." "What's the couple's name?" I said to the rabbi. "Tell me the name." I said, "Yes, it sounds familiar." And he says, "How do I know them?" He says, "They said you married them." And I took a moment and I looked at my files. Of course, yes. And I remembered after looking at my files, no different than an attorney who has clients, a doctor who has patients. I don't remember all of the weddings I do off the top of my head. Thank God I do a lot. I said, "Yeah, of course I remember them." And I remembered where they got married and when they got married and all the things that went with it. And I said, "Yes." And I started saying a few things about them. He said, "They are listed as a reference because they want to send their child to this Jewish day school in the city." I said, "Well, I will vouch for them. They are fantastic and they are wonderful. And indeed, you should accept the child." He said, "Are you sure they're Jewish?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "How do you know?" I said, "Well, I don't. I don't actually know if they're Jewish, but, I try to verify that information." He goes, "Well, how do you verify?" This is the conversation, ladies and gentlemen. It really happened this way. I said, "Well, I asked them when they come into my office, are you Jewish? Were you born Jewish? And were your parents born Jewish? And if they tell me yes, then I take their word for it. And if they tell me no, they're not Jewish, but they chose to be Jewish and went through a conversion process, or one of their parents did the same, I normally ask one or two questions related to that, or sometimes they have a validation, a certificate, and then I move forward." But I said to the rabbi, I said, "If you're asking the question as to whether I am a rabbi who will perform interfaith marriages between someone who's Jewish and someone who's not, I appreciate that question, and I appreciate it for the regulations you have for your school, but I don't do that. So anyone I marry is of the Jewish faith." He said, "I appreciate that, but how do you know they're Jewish?" I said, "Again, I told you. I asked them, and if they tell me they're born Jewish, then I take their word that they're Jewish." He says, "Do you do any investigation into the matter?" And for whatever reason, that question cooked my grits, as they say in the South. I said, "Investigation into the matter?" They said, "Yeah. What investigation do you do into the matter to guarantee that they are indeed Jewish?" I said, "I take their word for it." He goes, "You do? You just take their word for it? If they tell you they're Jewish, they just take their word for it?" I said, "Rabbi, can I ask you a question? I've never met you before, but have you ever been on an airplane?" He said, "Yeah, of course I've been on an airplane." I said, "Let me ask you a question. When you get on the airplane, do you ask any questions of the pilot? Do you ask when he had his last drink, if he ingests any medicinal drugs or any recreational drugs? Do you ask how many hours he or she has had in flight controls? Do you ask what their grades were in protocols? Or do you just go and take your seat and hope you get a full can of Coke with ice?" He said, "Well, it's a little different. I said, "Hold on a second. Have you ever needed to get a prescription before? Do you ever walk into a CVS or a Walgreens or Duane Reade, and whether you're picking up an antibiotic or you're picking up a cream for your hair, whatever it might be, the pharmacist gives you the prescription, how sure are you that they have the right bona fides to be a pharmacist? That all of the chemicals that they're mixing together are proper and right, that they're not influenced by anything in the wrong way, and that you are not ingesting something that will take care of you and treat you the way that it should. And he said, well, it's different. They have a certificate hanging up. I said, what does the certificate mean? Is there a certificate that makes us Jewish? Do I ask to see someone's bris? Do I ask for a video from their baby naming? What do I do to verify someone is Jewish? I said, in the examples I gave you, you're actually putting your life in danger. You're putting your life into another person's hands. You're saying to another person, I'm going to ingest the chemicals you gave and put total trust into you. Someone I don't know, someone who may or may not be Jewish. And hopefully these chemicals I ingest will help me. When I get on this airplane, I'm putting total trust in you. A pilot I don't know, whose background I don't know, who may or may not be Jewish. And I'm putting my trust in you that you're going to take me from Newark to Fort Lauderdale. And I'll get there safely. I'm also putting my trust in a whole host of people I've never met before, who take care of the aircraft, who look after all of the details and the wires and everything else that goes with it to ensure that it is safe. But you're so worried about unpacking the history of whether or not these people are bona fide, verifiable Jewish, as if there is some prescription that tells us who they are and how they are. I was so upset from this phone call, I went into Rabbi Cohen's office to commiserate with him. And he said to me, I heard of a case of another Orthodox group in another city that insists that every family coming in takes an ancestry DNA test, a swab, so that they can get the verification that indeed they read out as Jewish. I had the same response that you had, Luann. Are you kidding me? That's what Judaism is? That's what's going on here? That we are a people that only connect from DNA? There's no sense of connectivity in our hearts and our souls and our behaviors of who we are and how we are? This phone call has bothered me all week long. And as I begin to unpack it in my head, I realize that there are two things happening at the same time. There is a meta issue going on, and there is a practical issue going on. You see, there is the meta issue going on over what is a Jew, who is a Jew, and how do we count people as a Jew. And the second thing going on is this whole notion of what trust looks like and how we have eroded this notion of trust. And if it's okay with you, I want to get into the issue of trust for a moment first, and the who is a Jew question second. When I was a student at the Jewish Theological Seminary, JTS, in New York City, and I graduated 25 years ago, one of the things I did to help pay my way through school was I was the mashgiach. I was the kosher supervisor and inspector at the kitchen there. I know it's hard for all of you to believe looking at me. How could he be around food with a figure like that? But I did. And one of the jobs there was that we would go into the kitchen and make sure that all of the people who worked there, mostly who were not Jewish, didn't mix milk and meat, that all of the deliveries that came in and food that were ordered were kosher certified, the meats and so on, and that the things were prepared in the proper way. Especially when special chefs would come in who weren't Jewish and thought, well, if we make this dish, we always put milk in it, but we can't because we're serving chicken. So those are the kinds of things that we oversaw. And it was a pretty easy position. And for those of you who don't know, JTS is in the most academic square mile in the world. You have Bank Street College, you have Columbia, you have Barnard, you have Juilliard, you have Manhattan School of Music. All of these things are right there next to each other. And it means a lot of Jewish students who wanted a kosher meal would come to JTS to eat. And you're the kosher supervisor that's there. And about once or twice during my tenure as the kosher supervisor, the mashgiach, some Orthodox young person, normally a student at one of the other schools, would come in and ask questions about the kashrut. Now, I don't have a problem with asking questions about the kashrut. If they're particular about how they keep kosher, they should ask all the questions they want. But then they would do something that would cook my grits. They would say, "Can I go back in the kitchen and check for myself?" Now, there was a part of me that wanted to let them go back so that they could go back and see and verify. See, everything they do is kosher. Everything they do is correct. There really is not a problem here. But then there was a part of me that didn't want them to go back. And that part of me was saying, they're going to go tell all their friends, I went and made sure it was kosher because I don't really trust these people or this guy. I don't know him from anywhere. But meanwhile, they can go to any other kosher restaurant they've never been to before, and they're perfectly fine eating there. They don't ask to go in the back of the kitchen. And the rule we established was, you're not going back in the kitchen. If you're not comfortable eating here, that's your choice. And if you are, it's your choice. But the whole idea of kashrut is based on trust. And yes, there are bad actors, not many, but there are bad actors. There are people in the world who say a restaurant is kosher and all the meat is kosher, and then they're saving money by ordering non-kosher and serving it to us as kosher, and those are bad people. Most of the time, they get caught. It doesn't happen often, thank goodness. But when it does, according to Jewish law, if you or I walked into that restaurant and we ordered a hamburger under the assumption that hamburger was kosher, and we found out that the owner knowingly ordered not kosher meat, we have committed no crime. We have done nothing in transgression. There is no purification process for such a thing to happen. Why? Because we put our trust in somebody else, and they are the ones who betrayed our trust. And so much of Judaism and so much of the world is based on trust. And we, I believe, have gotten to a place where we are eroding that trust. When another person comes to me and tells me they're Jewish, when another rabbi comes to me and says, I performed their conversion, I was present at their bris, I was at their wedding, I did their bar bat mitzvah, that is enough verification for me that they are Jewish. Yes, there's always the case of a clergy person who doesn't have real authentication, who might lie, who might cheat. Those cases are very few and far between. And if we really think we're in a particular case like that, we can always take it another level. But in general, when someone gives me their word, I believe them. When someone invites me to their home for a meal and they say, Rabbi, our kitchen is kosher, I don't open the pantry. I don't ask how long they wait between milk and meat. I don't ask to see the different stickers on their pots and pans. I take their word for it, and I enjoy the meal. And I think we are doing a significant disservice to the entire relationship of Judaism when we start to erode the trust. This rabbi on the phone call who cooked my grits, I said to him, do you ask questions like this of every rabbi you call? And he said proudly, yes. I said, even the Orthodox rabbis? He said, yes, but you should know the Orthodox rabbis would never have taken the couple without doing all of this investigation first. I said, if an Orthodox rabbi or a Reform rabbi called me and said, I need your help with this particular case, I would take their word on it. I would trust them implicitly. I would meet them where they are. And that's not because you're looking at someone who sees Judaism through a liberal lens. I see Judaism through the lens of which it was designed, where we are constantly accepting people's testimony. In the Torah and in tradition, there are 4 times that women in particular, not just men, women's testimony is taken unquestionably. Hafreshat challah, when we come home and we say, you made challah, I'm so appreciative, how delicious. Did you take out the requisite part that was normally given to the priest? When we ask them if they have completed their menstrual cycle or not. When we ask them if they have immersed in the mikveh, all of these examples are examples where if they say yes, we trust them. If they say no, we believe them, and we don't ask for verification. This is not a case of sanctioning Iran where we trust and verify. These are human beings, where we're talking about a young child who's 2.5 years old, where it is a cutthroat environment to enter into a nursery school in Manhattan, where it's harder than getting into some Ivy League schools. And this is the verification process they're looking for. And God forbid, someone converted to Judaism 3 generations back, it might make this child ineligible for a Jewish education. How ridiculous, how crazy, how silly that this is the bar that we have established. The meta issue, which is much more complicated, is defining the question, who is a Jew? I wrestle with that question a lot. I wrestle with that question because I'm a proud conservative Jew, and conservative Judaism doesn't mean what conservative politics means. It means I'm a traditionalist who believes in modernity. And I firmly believe that a Jewish identity is determined by one's mother, even though a father has an important role in shaping a Jewish life. And I believe that if father is Jewish and the mother is not Jewish and the baby was born, and that child had a bar or bat mitzvah, and that child was raised in a Reformed congregation and was active in a Hillel, and met someone they fell in love with from this synagogue whose both parents were Jewish, that we have a conundrum on our hands. Someone who sees themselves as Jewish, who practices as Jewish, who was raised Jewish, who believes in their heart that they are Jewish, but according to strict interpretation of Jewish law, their mother isn't Jewish, so they're not. And when it comes to the nuptials for such a couple, which is a case that happens more times than I have fingers and toes to count, we have a challenge. So what is that challenge? What does it look like? How do you say to someone who identifies as Jewish, who sees themselves as Jewish, who participates in the life cycle and the calendar of the Jewish people, who's part of the rituals of being Jewish, who says, birthright changed my life, who had a bat mitzvah, who met their future partner at a Hillel mixer at the University of Miami. Yeah, that's all lovely, but you're really not Jewish. But at the same time, if we abrogate that connection of Jewish law and we say, you feel Jewish, you are, well, we've just taken down all of the systems of what our tradition is about. What I often liken it to is citizenship. There are some people who are citizens of this country simply because they were born in this country. There are other people who are citizens of this country because they want to be citizens of this country. They were born elsewhere, and they came, and they went through a process of naturalization. And they learned how to be citizens, and they've absorbed it, and then they take on citizenry. They vote, they pay taxes, they express themselves, and they are part of our country and its rich tradition, and that carries on from generation to the next. What do we do in a case of someone whose parent was on a trip to Portugal, and while they were there and they were 8 months pregnant, they were born prematurely? So the baby was technically born in Portugal, but to 2 American parents. They're not a naturalized citizen. And what if they came back to this country, the child was raised, they're 18, they go to vote, they go to get their first passport, and they say, where were you born? And you say, well, technically it was Lisbon, and it's a long story. What do you do to make that person American? Are you going to say to that kid after 18 years or 25 years or 30 years, you're not an American? Even though every 4th of July they're eating hot dogs with apple pie and going to baseball games and supporting our troops, do we say you're not American? Are you merely an American just by what you feel? Or is there some activation to that citizenship? The Judaism in the lens that I see says something that is the difference between a surgeon and a butcher. Something that is dealt with nuance, with soft hands, with caring, with kindness. And what I say to most of the couples who come before me, and what I would say to such a person about citizenry is, I believe you are an American. I believe you represent the best of what America is about. And I believe, Michelle, that you are a Jew. You are a Jew because you chose to celebrate a bat mitzvah. You're a Jew because you associated with Hillel. You're a Jew because of the connection you have to our homeland of Israel. You are a Jew for what you feel in your heart. But at the same time, there is a requirement of Jews. Some that happen just by being born, and some that happen just by choice. And I wouldn't want anyone else who doesn't see through the lens of Judaism the way that I see to nullify your Judaism, to discredit your Judaism, to take away your citizenship. So therefore, I want to swear you in as an American citizen, or I want to naturalize you as a Jewish person so that this question can't arise itself again. When I was a student at the Hartman Center, one of my colleagues one of my greatest teachers, all of my colleagues there were, she told of this conundrum that she was facing and asked how to deal with it. You see, this rabbi saw through the same lens that I see. And a member of her congregation was challenged. She could not bear children on her own, and she was forced to consider other vehicles to have a child come into the world. And she chose to adopt a child, and she adopted a child from a South American country. She went down to the country and picked up the child. The child was 9 or 12 weeks old and brought the baby back to America. She had all the paperwork necessary to show that this child was indeed hers and that there could be no contesting of this child at a later date, which gave her a peace of mind. My colleague and my friend, the rabbi, said to this congregant of hers, who she was very close with, "This is wonderful news. I couldn't be happier for you and for your family. This child just won the lottery. It's so lucky to have you as a parent. Now all we need to do is make a date to bring this baby to the mikvah, and then it will officially be part of the Jewish faith." And this traditional, engaged, Shabbat-going congregant said, "What are you talking about, Rabbi? This is my baby." The rabbi said, "Of course it's your baby. No one questions it's your baby." And the congregant said, "But if it's my baby, then it's already Jewish. It doesn't need that immersion." That's the meta-tension that we cannot gloss over. We cannot skip. We cannot ignore. Indeed, there are certain checklists and requirements for people to become Jewish. And if we just put those all in the background, all in the sideline, I think we do a great disservice to our history and just as much of a disservice to our future. But at the same time, if we don't meet people who say that they're Jewish in their heart and in their actions, who are observing holidays and Shabbat and making Jewish life in their home, and we are denying them who they are and how they are, well, I think we're doing a disservice there too. And I would contend that those who enter the rabbinate today need to be well equipped with all of the history and knowledge to determine what and how one becomes Jewish. But that is not all that they need. The knowledge anyone can obtain. What the rabbis of today need is they need soft hands. They need an open heart. They need patience and tolerance. They need to be able to meet people where they are so that whatever journey they're taking, they can take them by holding their hand and with softness and love and embrace and helping to see the world through their eyes. Something that this phone call refused to see. The phone call only saw it through one lens, the Jewish law what it says, how it says it, unequivocal. It didn't have any softness for this couple, who, by the way, were both born Jewish and their parents were born Jewish, who kept a kosher home before I met them. And now someone is unpacking the real authenticity of their Judaism. In the parsha we read today, Vayikra, we learn all the laws of being pure. And in the most orthodox circles of the world, whether in the diaspora or in Israel, Vayikra is what all the 3-, 4-, and 5-year-olds learn as their first section of the Torah. They don't learn about Noah's Ark. They don't learn about Adam and Eve. They don't learn about Jacob and Esau. They learn Vayikra, Leviticus, because it deals with the laws of purity. And the rabbis wanted them to know that if they're going to begin a life in Judaism, they must begin with purity. They must know what is pure and good and right. Well, I would argue that when rabbis are looking to invalidate, unpack, find holes with, and question someone's connection to our tradition, and to say to some, you're welcome here but not welcome there, even though we're all part of that same family, that's not pure at all. We can't stand together as one community only when they paint swastikas on our buildings. We also have to stand as one community with common denominators, appreciation for our differences, when people come and celebrate a simcha, like a bar, bat mitzvah, or a wedding. Those are moments of purity just the same, and required of us just the same. And that is what will lead to a brighter, healthier, and a more promising and pure future for us and for all the Jewish people. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may that be God's will, and let us say amen.